this morning. Yeah, well, yeah, they're probably not.
I didn't want to be caught the last one standing up. I know how y'all. Not the last one here.
All right, so we're really not going to be reading too much scriptures because, you know, most of it's just a discussion again, but you can go to 2 Samuel chapter 13, and this is going to take place between 2 Samuel 13 and chapter 19 is where the story takes place of King David and Solomon. So that's where you can reference. If someone would like to start out reading 2 Samuel 18, verse 33, please. 2 Samuel 18, verse 33.
And the king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And then he went and thus said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. With God I have died for thee, O Absalom, my son.
Right. So, did David have another tragedy right here? You know, we talked last week about where he lost his firstborn, and this is another one where he lost his son Absalom. So, the title of the lesson is Finding God in the Midst of Tragedy, is what we're going to talk about. It's always difficult to know what to say after a tragedy. Preachers and Bible teachers struggle to find the right words after events such as Columbine, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Even more difficult is speaking after tragedies that directly impacted your church and community. When tragedy hits close to home, finding God's presence is sometimes a challenge. David was no stranger to tragedy. He lost his best friend in a bloody battle, and his young son died for his sin with Bathsheba. The tragedy we read in 2 Samuel 13 through 18 chapters could not have hit any closer to home as it involved David's daughter and two sons. It is a story that involves incest, rape, revenge, murder, insurrection, and execution. Even God's closest followers are not exempt from this kind of horrific tragedies. The story we read in these chapters looks like a plot from an afternoon soap opera. And, you know, if you think about it, you know, people say, you know, the Bible's not relevant, the different things happen today than used to happen back then, blah, blah, blah. We can see the same things have happened since the beginning of time. You know, where Cain killed Abel and then, you know, all the other stories that you read. David's son Amnon takes sexual advantage of his half-sister, Tamar. Although King David was furious, the text gives us not indication that he did anything about it. So Absalom, Tamar's full brother, takes matters into his own hands and has Amnon murdered. Throughout this ordeal, Absalom sees weakness in his father, David, and mounts a coup. David finds himself running for his life and gathers a mighty army to regain his throne from Absalom. In the process of the battle, Absalom is executed. This is the third son David has laid to rest. Although Absalom was an insurrectionist, he was still David's son, and his death was still a tragedy to a father who loved him. So we can see David went through a lot in his life with personal tragedies as well. But he did stay and remain in God's care. But I think sometimes, as we talked about last week, there's consequences to actions or inactions that you may take. And what were some of the reasons that maybe David caused this situation here? You may be thinking, how did David cause it? His son Absalom did it. But think about it.
Well, I don't think he taught the values and principles to his son growing up.
Let's get close. Let's get,
I
okay.
mean, that's first start.
Right.
He was wishy-washy in his faith, and his service.
Okay.
On and off again.
On off again. What about, and I think this is a big problem in society, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but also with the family. What about David not holding Ammon responsible for his actions? It said in here that he did nothing to it that we can see, right? So since David, there was no punishment, David was king and was father, and should he have taken some action? It sure seems like it. So what did that say to Ammon?
And no problem.
And no problem, you know? But Absalom, you know, took it in his own hands then, right? And got revenge and killed his brother. So then even after that, what did David do to Absalom? Was he punished? I mean, might have been. I don't think he did much to him. Much at all.
He told him not to do anything. He told him to be silent.
Right. But that's,
That's it.
but even after the event happened, what happened? Nothing. So Absalom sees weakness in his dad, right? In King David. And that's why he looks to take over and started making plans to, you know, hey, y'all come to me, talk to me, I'll take care of it for you. He developed a following. So as we can see, and I think this happens in society a lot, what happens with us not holding people accountable for the laws that they break? It encourages more of it. There's no responsibility, no consequences. So what's wrong if I go and steal this, do that? Because there's no consequences. So again, if you're following me with what I'm saying, encourage them to do it again because they're not held accountable, right?
And they have their followers, which promote these things. And those followers end up protecting each other.
Right.
And then they keep growing and it just becomes a huge group of like-minded people. So people aren't afraid when they do stuff.
Right. And you got a large following doing the same thing, so it's going to be harder to take care of, Doc.
History repeats itself over and over and over.
That's what it's doing.
And secondly, like the socialism experiment that the AOC, the crew want to do. That's
They've
failed
done that
every
before.
time it's ever been done. And history just repeats itself and repeats itself. And the promises are usually, when you see these failures, is all the rest of them, I'm talking politically, all the rest of them say, well, things will be better tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes.
Right.
And that, you know, that's what happens in all these situations as they're repeated. And you don't have to have an IQ of 180 to figure that out.
Right. And we're looking at, and we're comparing, if you look at what happened in the Bible, it's not the same things happening today.
But it's close.
Do what?
It's close.
It's close. Happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, happened in Rome. I mean, all, for some reason, all,
You look at the Super Bowl commercial. That's all you gotta see.
it just starts repeating itself because people think either A, they can do it better, or B, they're leaving God and not following his commands, you know, which I believe is the most of it because they think they know they're a better way. And when you turn your back on God, that's maybe why it seems God is not here during tragedies in your life. What did God tell Israel? If they will not follow him, do what his will was? He would not be there for them. So do we think about that a lot of times? I mean, I know God never leaves. He never left David. But he's still there, but David, was he had free will to do his own thing? But he repented and went. Tragedy strikes both people and the devil's out there trying to, and you can find but yet Satan tried to get him. Doc?
I've always questioned, and just for everybody here, are these random acts, which we see all day long, random acts, including from our situation from the Bible to us, are these random acts? Or are they really partially planned by the devil through his spirit, his influence, let's put it that way? In other words, are they random or are they planned?
Well, I think, and this is my opinion, that and when you're looking at Satan, there may be a lot of acts may affect your life, but depending on where you put yourself sometimes. Because, I mean, if you're here in Texas and something happens in Texas, that may affect you. Whereas if you were in Oklahoma, it wouldn't affect you. So, I mean, sometimes I think it is our circumstances where we are, but the devil's behind all evil. So it may just be where we are that we get affected sometimes, but I think it is all planned out by Satan. He is out there doing everything he can to turn our hearts from God. And sometimes, just with like Job, I think it is targeted though. Sometimes I think it may be a bystander, but with Job, it was targeted. And I think sometimes we're targeted depending on how strong our faith is, what we're trying to do for God. Any opinions on that? I mean, Joe?
Tells us that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but spiritual things in spiritual places.
Right? So it tells us we're right there wrestling with the devil. Roger, your thoughts? No, hey, John?
I'm thankful it's the last day of June.
Because it's the last class of men?
Because June was definitely doing a gay pride month.
Yeah.
And don't think society as a whole is not behind that. I can get
Right.
all you have to just turn TV on, look at the companies and the various organizations, backing it all the way.
Well, I'm glad a lot of them are backing back out of that now. There's a lot of them that are finding out that it's not benefiting them. So I hope society keeps turning back, but I know it's going to be tough. Go ahead.
The devil's gonna go after Christians,
Yeah.
those who are,
Who he doesn't
strong in
have.
their faith, or
Right.
whatever. Why would he want to go after someone who's not a Christian or not? He already has those people.
Right.
He wants these, and that's why, those things, situations come up where we are put to that choice of, what are we gonna do? Because he's testing us and he knows our weaknesses, and that's what he's gonna do. But he's going after those who are stronger in the faith than he would those who are not, or are kind of wishy-washy, like, I basically have them because they're not here nor there.
He doesn't have to put much effort
Right,
towards that.
and like, the word said, you can't be half and half. You've got to pick me or the other. You can't stand on the fence and, play both sides. You can't.
Right.
So, and that's what we have to remember, that when we go out into the world, everything that we do every day, if we've got God first, that's gonna help us with whatever Satan's gonna throw at us for the day.
Right. That's true. Doc?
Do you feel that spiritual power is different from any other power or influence that we face? And that is because we face good, or can be good, and we face evil every day. And is that different from any other power that we face? Is that, and I always refer to it neurologically, just something that people can be hardwired with, or is that something, just a power that we are faced with and issues on a daily basis?
I think God tells us to stay away from evil spirits and things, which I think can be a big influence. I mean, you look at King Saul when he went into the medium, he was not supposed to do that. So whether or not you believe in that, which, I mean, I have a tough time believing that happens, but we have examples in the Bible where it did happen. And she called Elijah up, and then, he's like, why are you calling me up? So we see an example where that has happened, So, I mean, it is probably a possibility. I know that Kim and I, when we got married, we visited New Orleans and went around and, was going to the shops, and then there's this voodoo shop. I'm like, let's go in and see what's in there. I walked in there and had the worst feeling over me. I said, we gotta leave, and so I do think that spiritual things such as Satan have more of a powerful influence over you, depending on your frame of mind and where you are with God. If you don't have God in your life, I think he's going to be easily taken over your life. Does that make sense? Does that answer where you're?
Yeah, to me, it just means that prayer is as powerful, if not more powerful, when you pray frequently and when you pray for the good and you recognize evil where it is and for what it is.
And I think we're going to get a little bit more
difference. There's some things that you can't do that don't make any difference.
right. And I think we're going to get more of that in the lesson where we're talking about the closer you are to God, guess what? The further you are from Satan, right? So I think that's going to be a large part that we'll talk about some people that bad things happen to, such as Joseph but we see throughout his life and Moses' life, Moses killed someone, right? He was scared, he hid. But, the closer he was to God, the more that God took over his life. So I think we'll see that happens. Yes.
In Romans 8, right at the end of the chapter, it tells us that nothing can take God away from us
Except us.
ourselves. So we have to be the ones that are vigilant, like he said, we have to pray, we have to be close to God, we have to know God, know Jesus, and we can tell the devil to go away.
Right. And it's still not saying that we'll stumble, but we've got to have our heart right and know that, like I said, the more we pray, the more we read our Bible to understand what God wants in our life, the better and the closer we'll be to Him.
If we understand that, know that we have that power, that we can't be taken away from God, that should really make us stronger.
I think if we look through the Bible, we see that God's always been, and when I say stationary, He doesn't change, He doesn't move. He's been the same God He was from the beginning. So you go back and you look at Israel, what happened to Israel? They get close to Him, but they would turn their back and wander away into evil, right? And start worshiping idols and everything. So that's, and God doesn't hear you when you're not right with Him, right? Unless you're seeking Him, and then He's working with you. So I think.
We're told in the Bible to avoid all appearance of evil. But we got to pray every day that we can see it.
Right.
We stay on the way we know is studying God's word that can keep us being aware to get away from this evil and that we recognize it and stay away from it.
Right. And to recognize it, you got to know the truth. Exactly. So there's something interesting about these 6 chapters of scripture that we talked about in 2 Samuel. You don't see God's name mentioned much. It's even difficult to see Him working at times, although we know He was. Why is it often difficult to find God in the midst of tragedy? It's difficult to find God in tragedy because He is often ignored by those who cause it. Believe me, if you were causing tragedy, would you be doing God's will? So basically, you got your back turned on God, So Hanan's pursuit of tomorrow was based in his own desires, not God's. And his friend Jonadab was no Nathan. He did not encourage him to do what was right. Absalom's revenge certainly was not based in God's will. It is mine to avenge. I will repay, in Romans 12, chapter 12, verse 19. The reason it is difficult to find God in this story is because evil is prominent in the story. And we know where evil is, God's not there, right? Because God and evil can't be in the same place. The events that we often struggle to explain are a result of the evil that lives in the world. Jesus refers to Satan as the prince of this world, and Paul reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, as Joe mentioned earlier, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms, in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. It is difficult to find God in tragedy because those in power often do not do his will. When Ammon raped Tamar, David had a responsibility. As we talked about earlier, David didn't stand up with his responsibility as both a father and a king to punish him. According to 2 Samuel chapter 13, verses 21 through 23, he did not fulfill his responsibility. As a result, Absalom took the problem in his own hands. And think about this. So if you've got children, and they're all close to the same ages, playing together, and you see one kid take a toy from another one, what are you going to do? Say again?
Tell him give it back.
Tell them to give it back. You're going to make sure that happens, right? What if you ignore them? What's going to happen?
It's gonna take something more.
The one that it was taken from is going to go do something to get it back or cause more problems because there's not that structure set in place, right? So, the kids are going to do their own thing. If one child takes a toy from another child and the parent is preoccupied, it won't be long before you hear a scream, right? Because they're going to start getting into a fight. When Absalom murdered Ammon, David again had a responsibility as both the father and the king to punish him. According to 2 Samuel 13, 30 through 37, he again did not fulfill his responsibility. As a result, Absalom sees weakness in his father and usurps the throne. During the battle that ensues, Absalom is killed. Though the story of family tragedy, we learn that when evil goes unpunished, it only grows and gets worse. As we were kind of talking about society, you're not punishing the criminals, they're going to be encouraged to keep doing the same thing again and again. Parents have a responsibility to punish their children. Many family tragedies could be averted if children were held accountable for their actions. David was the classic permissive parent. Maybe he saw his children making the same mistakes he did and felt unqualified to make a judgment. If a child's actions are against the will of God, it is our responsibility to discipline even if we have made the same mistakes. Furthermore, governments have a responsibility to punish criminals. God came up with the idea of law. God came up with justice. And when the law is not upheld and justice is not fulfilled, evil only spreads. Please understand that this is not a political statement, but it is a biblical statement. David failed to fulfill God's will in a matter of law and justice. And when law and justice are not fulfilled, it is difficult to find God because we have silenced one of his most powerful tools. So something to think about. If you're not upholding God's will, is he in your life? No. So it is difficult to find God in tragedy, as we just said, but not impossible. Tragedies leave even the most seasoned of believers wondering, where are you, God? Are you listening? Do you care? It's difficult to see past the evil and the sin and the injustice. The inability to see past those things leads to frustration, doubts, and anger. And although finding God in tragedy can be difficult, the example of David shows us that we can. In Psalms chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Someone like to read that, please? Psalms chapter 3, verses 1 through 4.
Lord, how are they increased who trouble me? Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say to me, there is no help for no God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill.
So what's going on with David at this time? When Absalom was rebelling against him,
He left Jerusalem.
He fled, right? So, but you can still see that, he's going through tragedy right now. He had a lot going on in his life, but he still looked to God knowing what? God will take care of him. As David is fleeing from Absalom, he prays this prayer. Even in his darkest hour, he recognized that God was his shield. When tragedy strikes, we are often overcome by fear. Yet David goes on to say, I will not fear with 10,000 drawn upon every side. David didn't know the outcome when he prayed the prayer, but he knew who would deliver him. When tragedy strikes, we are often overcome by questions and left with a feeling of anxiety. David felt that anxiety, and it caused him to run. But then he realized something we often forget. From the Lord comes deliverance. It was only then they began running in the right direction. So a lot of times, our perspective on tragedy is based on what? Personal experience. I think that's a lot of it.
It's our immediate fears, what we see right in front of us.
Our immediate fears.
Not taking time to look at the big picture.
Right. So a lot of times we're just focused on the immediate. Okay.
Don't think with the outcome, how I end up, you know.
Yeah, you think about the outcome. But so we've got a personal experience, our fears, our outcome, the immediate, what's happening. But what should be the influence of no matter what tragedy we go through in life?
God will take care of it.
God will take care of us. And that's what it says, and that's what David did. And sometimes it's hard because, you know, as humans, and you heard it many, many, many times, what do people say when a tragedy happens? Where is God? They blame God a lot of times. But we know God is not the source of evil. God's not the source of the bad things that happen. It is the devil. So I've got a few characters in the Bible. So, you know, let's go through these and think about what they did to cause, or what the cause was of their tragedy, and what was done. Okay? So when we have difficulty seeing God in the midst of tragedy, we can rest assured that He is in the same place He was when Adam and Eve rebelled into evil. What happened there? I mean, we all know.
The devil instead of what God told them.
Right.
And as a result, they sinned, and then they were afraid to talk to him, see him, and walk with him.
But what did God do? He covered their sin. Huh?
He confronted them.
He confronted them, and He covered their sin. Right? So you know, we understand that, and if you look back, a lot of times, like I said, we've got consequences of things that we do in our life. Now, Job, when we get to him, it wasn't his fault that happened. You know, he didn't do anything to cause it. He was a righteous and upright man. So it shows that no matter what, Satan is out there trying to get each and every one of us. What about when Noah built an ark? Noah was another one that didn't do anything wrong, but what happened?
People persecuted him.
People
It's crazy.
ridiculed him, persecuted him, laughed at him, and truthfully, isn't that one of the most hurtful things? When people laugh at you, when they ridicule you.
It never had rain, so people wasn't funny friendly.
Right, yeah. They didn't even know what this rain was at the time. So, but God was protecting Noah from disaster by what? Having him build an ark. Okay? And protecting him from the people. What about, where was God when Job lost everything he had?
He was very close.
He was very close. But he also, as we can see, did put a protective fence around Job, you might say, because he told the devil, you just can't take his life. Because God knew what? Job would be faithful. Job was strong enough. So I think we can look at that sometimes and know that God knows where we are and what we can take. He knows where to put that fence. What about when Abraham's faith wavered? Well, I don't know, there's a lot of different times, right?
Several times,
So,
but one time, I think one of the kings that had taken Sarah. had-
yeah, I said, hey, what'd you do to me? Exactly. But God, he took care of Abraham as well. He safeguarded the fulfillment of his promise through Abraham by making sure nothing happened there. What about when Joseph? What about Joseph? Did Joseph do anything wrong? Maybe he antagonized his brothers a little bit.
Maybe a little arrogant.
A little arrogant. But Joseph, it was through no fault of his own that what happened. His brothers put him in a pit, sold him into slavery. Then again, he was faithful doing what he was supposed to do. And what happened at Potiphar's house? He got thrown in jail again because he did what's right. And not only did he say, hey, I can, what did he tell Potiphar's wife?
Against God.
Against God. I can't sin against God. So another thing to think about. So God was in the same place when Joseph was rotting in jail, accomplishing his perfect will. What about Moses? Moses was living the life of a king, right? And then he murdered someone. Now, I don't know, and I'm wondering what would have happened if Moses had stayed. You know, I mean, I'm just saying because he was the king's son and more than likely probably had the right to put someone to death. You know, I'm not positive in that, but I would think he would because the king certainly had that right. So the king would probably back him up. But you know what? He was scared and he knew he'd done something he shouldn't have done. So he went and hid in the desert for 40 years, right? And what was God doing then?
Molding.
Fulfill his mission later.
Right, preparing him to fulfill his mission. So sometimes we may be put in a place we don't understand why we're there. But at that same time, what should we always be doing? Trusting God, studying his word, and seeing what we should be doing for him. What about he was in the same place when Samson was groping in darkness? Now, Samson, from what I'm learning here lately, I never thought about this, especially as a little kid, but was Samson doing what he was supposed to do all his life? No. I mean, and seriously, I was like, you know, once you start studying more, you're like, Samson wasn't a very good guy, but he was one of God's judges. But what happened at the end of Samson's life? Yeah, because he had looked up and said, God, help me take care of what I should have taken care of, basically. And he was able to do that. So I don't know. I was talking to Joe because I know sometimes you wonder what happened to Samson because he really wasn't following what God told him to do, you know. But then, you know, did he come back and have his heart right at the end? Because God came back and gave him the power again. So he had time to think about a lot while he was in darkness. So the same place he was when Jonah was being swallowed by a fish. So sometimes we think we got the better way to do something, right? And Joe, let me ask you, what would you do if you went and you preached to a city and they repented? You'd rejoice, wouldn't you? But Jonah, what did he do? He was mad because he knew that God would if they repented. And so, yeah, he would. So not only did he not want to go do it, but then when he got there, he was reluctant at doing it because he knew that God would forgive them if they repented, and they did. And then God had to teach him another lesson, you know.
It was much better patriot than he was a prophet.
Yeah. So sometimes we've got to, I guess, where we are in our life, we got to understand that it's not that we're here for that reason, but maybe we need to figure out what we're supposed to be doing that God tells us to do, you know, so.
In Jonah's defense, when you hear about the city of Nineveh and how evil they were and how the king was and the things they had been doing about killing people in other countries, when they were trying to take over the world.
Right.
You could kind of understand why it was scary.
Yeah, well, scared to go, but when they repented, of course, he could have got haughty and thought, hey, look what I did. Yeah. What about the same place when Peter and John were beaten for preaching the gospel? He gave them great opportunities for sharing the good news of Christ. In the same place he was when Jesus hung on the cross. So he allowed his son to die on that cross. Did Jesus do anything to deserve that? Nothing. We did everything to him that he took it, right? Because of our sin. But in that one act, what did God do? Save the whole world. He drew everybody to him, right? If you would accept Christ, he drew everybody to him. Although we may be surprised when tragedies hit, God is not. God was not shocked by the events surrounding Amon and Absalom, but he was saddened by it. God is still saddened by tragedies, and we can use comfort in the fact that he saw it coming. If he saw it coming, he also knows how to deliver us from it. He also knows more than any other how to comfort those affected by tragedy. God himself faced tragedy when his son was nailed to the cross. If God is not exempt from tragedy, why should we be? So you think about what the cost that Satan caused God. That's the death of his only son. And what happened at that moment when Jesus died and all the sin was placed on him? You think Jesus was separated from God for a minute? The earth shook, the temple veil ripped. And then what did the Roman soldiers say at that time? Surely this was the Son of God. So they realized what had happened. So, and someone with more experience with this can answer this question if you'd like. Have you ever had to stand before a crowd and teach after a tragedy? What did you say and how did God help you through it? Joe, have you done that?
Yes. And you have to talk about the future and how that God will comfort us until we can stand on our own. You can't make excuses for God because God is sovereign, and you just have to point them to the future that things will get better and that God is on our side while we're going through this.
Anyone else? Can you think of any tragedies in the last decade that were a result of God being ignored? What would the world be like if more people listened to him?
I think the tsunami that hit wherever it hit over there.
Was it India?
Indonesia.
Yeah, Indonesia.
Yeah, that was the hub of homosexuality. And I think that God is making Satan fail.
Hey, we wiped it out.
I think when people stop serving the Lord, they invite calamity in their life. I'm not saying that everything that happens to people is because of sin. That Job proved that to be wrong.
Right.
We also know that God judges people for sin, even now.
That's a good point. How do parents often contribute to the bad behavior of their children? How does that happen? How they contribute?
They don't reprimand.
They don't reprimand. Yeah, that's
Or they are very inconsistent in their
inconsistent.
dealing with their children. Their children don't know what to expect. It's like our law, we don't know what to expect. We can go do something and get away with it. Well, maybe it's worth it.
So they don't discipline or hold them accountable because a lot of times they want to be their friend. Doc?
It's 2 C's. Parents can conform to what society is doing, and they can condone what the children have done. Always remember 2 C's. Conforming to what's in the society and condoning what's going on. Anytime you get into that, you're on a slippery slope to go down the hill.
Because what happens when the teacher calls home about little Johnny? Little Johnny didn't do that. That's my son. And the parents back them up nowadays, right? So you're condoning.
Informing and condoning. You can put it up anytime you want to, whether it's good or bad.
And if you don't address it, it is condoned.
And right, but just like David. Yeah.
Now, in public, if you discipline your, people automatically think it's abuse. And so it's like, it's one hand or the other, what are you supposed to do?
Well, I don't know, Mom and Daddy, you know, that we usually didn't get in trouble in public, but it was wait till you get home, so that was just as bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who have been reprimanded for disciplining their
Oh.
child in the grocery
No,
store.
I know,
It's
yeah,
like-
and they get in trouble or they call the cops on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's sad, but yeah, I know that's happened. But that's why I said that, because I mean, my mom and dad, we didn't really get in trouble out, it was just wait till you get home, and you knew that it was gonna happen,
Oh,
so.
our son got drugged around by his ear. Because,
Are they longer than each
yeah,
other?
that's the only way I can get his attention without saying anything.
But again, you've got to take action and make sure that they conform to what the way you want them to go.
That's where the consistency comes in. Because if we're not consistent, if I tell you it's gonna be spanked or whatever when we get home, and I forget, then the next time he thinks it's worth it, I might forget again.
Not forget. How does the government often contribute to the bad behavior of its citizens?
Cashless bail.
Laws.
Cashless bail, that's a good one.
Depends
What'd
on
you say,
what-
Judge?
Spasmodic enforcement of laws.
Yeah, or
They go after
unequal,
one person real badly and turn their back on the other one.
right, yeah, it's unequal justice. The DA is not prosecuting what they should be prosecuting, letting people get away with stuff.
Jail's so full that they let the offenses out.
Right. But just, like I said, there's a lot of times no punishment for evil now, so,
Well, and a good example of that is the use of marijuana.
yeah.
Now it's a misdemeanor.
Well, everybody does it,
Where
might as
some
well
people
make it
serve
equal.
40
right?
years for it.
Yeah. There doesn't seem to be a recognition of, the laws aren't based on what's right and what's wrong anymore, but it's on what's acceptable today.
Right, yeah.
And we as Christians have to always remember what is right in the sight of God and what is not, and what to participate in and what not to participate in.
When the government's allowing a lot of things, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And, two things real quick. How can we overcome the anxiety it often brings? And then what is the ultimate root of all suffering and tragedy? Again, I think that's evil and Satan. Thank y'all, appreciate it.
My question.